Consider supporting the work of Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian by becoming a monthly patron. Your contributions will help keep the resource alive and support its mission. Visit patreon.com/NAHblog to learn more and make a contribution of $3, $5, $10, or $20 per month. Again, that's patreon.com/NAHblog. You can start or stop anytime. Thank you for listening. Welcome to the Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian podcast. I'm your host, Rolando Tompkins Jones. I'm a social worker, social justice educator, writer, organizational consultant, and now podcaster who works to build more equitable and inclusive communities. I am also an aspiring humanitarian. My experiences have shown me that in the process of working for social justice outwardly, it's also important for us to continue to critically examine ourselves, shedding attitudes and behaviors that are oppressive to make room for those that are more inclusive, just, and humanitarian. What is an aspiring humanitarian, you ask? When I say humanitarian, I don't mean humanitarian in the harmful sense of placing ourselves in the role of a benevolent hero who's there to swoop in and save others. I mean dedicating one's life, time, and energy to honoring the ways that our destinies are intertwined. It's about accepting the lifelong pursuit to become more humane to those around us, with the recognition that we lose important parts of our humanity when we allow and enable the suffering of others. It means acknowledging our many contradictions and complications and aspiring to do more, aspiring to do better. It means acknowledging that systems of oppression exist by design and not by accident, and working towards an individual and collective transformation that includes an unshakable belief that our society's safety, viability, survival, and ability to thrive is only as secure as our most marginalized community members. Since 2011, my blog, Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian, has been a place where I've written and curated content on issues of equity and social justice. Through using written word, film, and video, and other forms of media for social justice education, I hope to continue to expand and enrich the narratives about social issues that face our society and to find ways to take action while encouraging others to do the same. Today, the blog and now the podcast is for others who share a passion for that same journey. No matter who you are, where you come from, what your identities are, or what area of work you're in, there's room enough for all of us in this work, and I hope that engaging with the podcast or the blog can move you closer to discovering or reaffirming your answers to the questions that you may have about how you can best be of service. Thank you for choosing the Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian podcast. This is your host, Rolando Tompkins Jones. On this week's episode, I'm going to be talking a little bit about this idea of preparing students for the real world. And when I say preparing students for the real world, I'm actually meaning preparing students with marginalized identities. So preparing them for the real world. And so there's a lot of different things that I hear when it comes to the importance of doing that. One example I'll hear is this idea that, it's impossible to know everything. Students need to develop tougher skin. They need to know that the real world isn't going to cater to their need for safe spaces. We need to prepare them for the real world. So we're not going to, recognize the pronouns that students use. We're not going to think about how students' marginalized identities can play a role in, and in their lives' history can play a role in the challenges that they face on the road to graduation, the challenges that they've already overcome to be in higher education. We're not going to do that because the real world doesn't care about that. So the students, it's on them, the students with marginalized identities, to develop tougher skin. So working in higher education, I'll often hear statements like these from people who are passively or actively engaged in denying their own complicity, whose need to feel good and self-assured about themselves outweighs the reality that they need to change. I've seen how this mindset can be used to minimize the reality of the impact of microaggressions and other acts of institutional oppression that really influence the lives of students with marginalized identities. I've talked about and written about this before, but Systems of oppression are designed to impact the lives of people with marginalized identities, regardless of how they might feel about themselves personally, in terms of self-esteem, commitment, or whatever traits are often used as a way to explain what they're experiencing with a deficit explanation, and explain like that's why individuals or groups aren't in a certain place in life. It could be because you just didn't work hard enough, because you don't value education, like all these other like different stereotypes and things that come up to explain oppression as if that's just the way it is. But here's the thing. The secret that's not so secret is that students with marginalized identities are already well aware of how they're perceived in this world and the value that is not placed on their lives because of their identities. They already recognize that they have to navigate through systems that did not have them in mind at their inception and are more often than not at all designed for their participation and success. So, in this way, it is students with marginalized identities who are much more in touch with how the real world actually works. So, I think one of the greatest imperatives for us as educators for social justice, as advocates for social justice, lies in really working to shift the narrative around this, to illuminate the reality that when we think about safe spaces, the spaces are safest for people with power and privilege, with multiple privileged identities. The spaces are safest for them. And so I think a really important imperative is to shift that language, is to shift that narrative when it comes up. Oh, students with marginalized identities just need to have tougher skin. To wait a minute, actually, they already know. They know the world as it is. They're positioned to really be able to understand the world as it is. And with that being what it is, they then are not the ones that we need to prepare for the real world. It is actually students with privileged identities who need to be prepared for the real world, who need to recognize the ways in which they are complicit with oppression, who need to recognize that the world does not revolve around them, who need to develop tougher skin and recognize there are different ways of doing and being and that sort of thing. So instead of passively accepting those victim blaming narratives that assumes that the solution lies with students with marginalized identities to develop tougher skin, we really have to shift that language, do the difficult work of elevating the reality, again, that it is students with privileged identities who need to know that the world does not revolve around them. And it is they who need to expand their worldview and critical consciousness. And it is them who will need to learn to navigate a world that is increasingly more diverse. So it's time to, commit to shift those narratives, because the comfort that they've become accustomed to actually leaves them ill prepared to interact with the real world as it is. And so my hope is that we continue to challenge and engage these narratives when they come up. Again, narratives that point the blame on folks who are experiencing marginalization, shift it from that to addressing like the root causes. Okay, so it's not on you, if you are a marginalized student out there listening, student with marginalized identities, if you're a practitioner with marginalized identities, like it's not on you to adapt and change. It is actually in reality on the folks for whom the spaces are and have been the safest to change. Okay, so I want to leave you with that important distinction and shift of language. All right, so thanks again for choosing the Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian podcast. I look forward to engaging with you in the next episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave a review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To find show notes for this and additional episodes, visit podcast.notesfromanaspiringhumanitarian.com. Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian is a labor of love and will continue to be. Consider supporting the work of Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian by becoming a monthly patron. Your contributions will help keep this resource alive and support its mission. Visit patreon.com/NAHblog to learn more and make a contribution of $3, $5, $10, or $20 per month. Again, that's patreon.com/NAHblog. You can start or stop anytime. Thank you for joining me this week. Take care.